Hello, and welcome to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM, a show where we focus on health topics important to our community. This year's team is made up of 8 fourth-year VIU nursing students, and our goal is to demystify health issues and address common misconceptions by sharing evidence-informed information from a variety of reliable resources. All information provided on our show will be available on our show notes on Facebook and Instagram pages. We want to remind our listeners that the information presented in this show is for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice of your primary healthcare professional. If you have any questions or concerns about what's being discussed, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook at A Sound Constitution, Instagram at CHLY A Sound Constitution, or email us at asoundconstitution@gmail.com.
We would like to start our show by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Navajo people, with a broadcasting range that overlaps the Cohowton and Sliamon territories. This acknowledgement is done with the gratitude to the Navajo people and with the intention to increase awareness about truth and reconciliation processes and efforts on Vancouver Island. Additional information and resources surrounding the Navajo history, reconciliation, protocol, and land acknowledgement can be found on our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube pages.
Welcome back to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM. I'm Lauren, joined here today by my co-hosts Kiana, Karis, and McKenna. For today's episode, we're talking about wildfire season and its health implications. 2023 proved to be an incredibly challenging fire season. This year alone, there were 2,200 fires reported and 25,000 square kilometers of land was burned, making it a record-breaking fire season. British Columbia, often known for our ocean and mountain air, was sometimes among the worst air quality in the world. So how does this affect people? How can we be prepared? And who is fighting these fires? Stay tuned to find out. Today we have 2 very special guests coming on our show. First, Tristan Nissen, an initial attack wildland firefighter who will be sharing his experiences working on the front lines. We will then speak with Trina Moyels, award-winning Canadian author and journalist, who will be speaking about her most recent article, Treated Like Machines, Wildfire Fighters Describe a Mental Health Crisis on the Front Lines. So stay tuned. I was fortunate enough to interview Tristan. Tristan developed an appreciation for the outdoors at a young age, having grown up in Jasper National Park. He now lives in Nelson, BC, where he works on an initial attack crew for BC Wildfire Services. In his spare time, he enjoys climbing, biking, and all things outdoors. He also happens to be my older brother and someone I have always looked up to. So stay tuned to hear him speak about his experiences working on the front lines. Okay, so I'm here with Tristan, and he is a wildland firefighter for BC Wildfire Services. So Tristan, thank you so much for joining us on our show today.
Well, thanks for having me, Lauren.
So can you please tell me a little bit about yourself and what your role is as a wildland firefighter?
Yeah, so for 8 months of the year, I work out of the Kootenay Lake Initial Attack Base in Nelson here. And I am a crew member on a initial attack crew. And essentially, my role is fire suppression. Our team's objective is to go out and ensure that lightning strike fires are put out before they can grow into large ones. So essentially, we are kind of responding to really small, isolated incidents where we're able to attack it extremely fast before it has a chance to grow.
Right, interesting. Okay, so how long have you been doing this wildfire fighting?
2 seasons. Yeah. I did a little bit of fire suppression work back in my home community, but for BC Wildfire, it's been 2 seasons.
Okay, and what did you do in your home community?
It was more like fuel mitigation, and it's like the whole kind of other side of wildfire fighting is kind of like fire prevention, and that's ensuring kind of structures and communities have kind of a buffer around them to prevent fast-growing wildfires from affecting them.
Right. So with your current role, could you run me through kind of what a day in the life looks like for you?
Absolutely. So obviously there's different roles and different days throughout the season. So I'll give you kind of a chronological order of like how a season would look.
Sure.
So kind of like in the spring, we actually start fairly early, beginning of March, and March is normally kind of dedicated to training. We have a very strong chainsaw program within Kootenay Lake, so a lot of chainsaw training and prescribed burns. So a lot of burning cut blocks within the Nelson area to help with reforestation. So kind of that takes up most of March and April. Come May, we're definitely looking at sending crews to northern communities where the spring dip has already happened. Essentially, the north gets drier quicker than the south does, and they normally have bigger fires earlier on in the season than down south. So a lot of times, most of our crews are away in Fort St. John, Mackenzie, Fort Nelson, just kind of those northern BC communities where we're what we call on deployment. So it's a 14-day shift fighting fires elsewhere in the province. And then once that kind of wraps up, they essentially get green up, where also now there's like more moisture, and essentially the heat wave almost kind of works its way down, and the south becomes the drier and more likely to have wildfires. So, come July, August, our zone Nelson receives a lot of lightning, and we have a lot of wildfires. And so we're normally in zone, which means like within Nelson for the months of July and August. And that's where we will be responding to initial attack fires. And if a fire gets away, we'll be responding to more of a extended attack wildfire operation. And then once the wildfire season kind of calms down locally, we look to send crews or resources elsewhere, which would be going on deployment. Like we have crews currently in Kelowna right now, in Kamloops, and all the way up in Fort St. John. And then once that's wrapped up, it's just kind of training, whether it's like physical training, chainsaw training, first aid training, everything that we can do to better our program and strengthen the skill set of our team.
Right. So what are some of the requirements to be on the fire crew?
Requirements would be to hold a valid driver's license. I think it's be of 18 years of age, and to have your occupational first aid level 1 with the transportation endorsement level 1.
Are there any physical requirements?
Yeah, so new recruits will have to pass. It's actually a reoccurring physical test. It's called the WFX ramp test. And essentially, an individual has 14 and a half minutes to complete a certain amount of repetitions up and over this ramp carrying a heavy bag. So I think you have about 55 pounds on your back, and you have to walk up and over this ramp 50 times, and then you have to do a hose pull 4 times to the length of that. So it's definitely quite extensive. Like you definitely want to be going into that being physically prepared. But most people within this organization definitely take pride in keeping physically active and fit. And so we have a very strong and athletic workforce for sure.
Great. Thank you. So obviously this fire season has been incredibly challenging for many communities. Can you tell me about your experience this season working on the front lines?
Absolutely. Nelson, the South essentially got really lucky this year. We didn't have many major incidents like communities kind of further north. Obviously, Kelowna had a very tragic wildfire, but Nelson got really lucky. So we didn't actually feel necessarily the effects that some of the northern communities felt, like Burns Lake and Fort St. John. But yeah, obviously a major emotional toll on most of the wildfires. Like I had 4 deployments or 3 deployments this year, and that's a lot. That's physically draining. You feel pretty tired by the end of those. And some crews are on their 8th. So extremely busy year for a lot of those unit crew members, and a lot of major physically and emotionally draining days, long hours, breathing in a lot of smoke. And my respect goes out to them that they're out there still to this day putting out fire when our zone is definitely quieted down quite a bit.
Well, obviously there's some long days and there's some hard days, but how do the crews keep a high morale during these difficult times?
I honestly think it's pretty much who you work with. Like are so lucky that the BC Wildfire kind of attracts a very, fun, energetic group of people. So I would say it's just the camaraderie with your crew members. Everyone's in it together. If it sucks, if it's hard, everyone's doing it, and everyone just tries to stay as positive as possible. And that's where it's kind of fun. That's what everyone actually likes, is the grinding with your fellow coworkers, and that's what kind of makes the best memories at the end of the season.
Right. So, kind of to talk a little bit about fires in general, how do most wildfires start?
In our zone, majority are lightning strike fires. What we see as a lot is industry fires, so kind of like logging operations will accidentally start fires. But for the most part, it is lightning strike fires.
And so, a human started fire, that would mostly be like industrial fires. What about like smoking or I know guns are often responsible for fires. Is that true?
I haven't heard a ton of guns starting fires, but again, what we see is like during a logging operation, they're on the hillside, and a machine will like spark, it will hit a rock, and a spark will fly off and will catch the forest on fire. And then like trains and stuff. But again, I'm mostly only familiar with our zone, which we just receive an extreme amount of lightning throughout the summer months. We're in like this weird lightning belt that really attracts a lot of lightning, higher mountains, like steep ground. So almost exclusively every fire that I have dealt with in my time at Kootenay Lake and this area has been caused by lightning.
You mentioned earlier prescribed fires. Can you talk about a little bit about what prescribed fires are and how you ensure that those fires remain in control?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kootenay Lake, the base that I'm currently at, we do a lot of burning cut blocks. So essentially, a logging operation will take place, and they will remove timber. They will remove it from the hillside. And what would be best to accelerate the growth and the health of the next crop of trees would be if that area had been burned. So our crews will go out and we'll set sprinklers around the perimeter, and we'll have hosers on each side of the fire or each side of the cut block. And so the sprinklers will go, and we're essentially just increasing the relative humidity of that area, like trying to get the RH up, making sure the whole area around it is soaked. And then we have individuals with drip torches. So essentially is like a canister that spews fire out of it. And you start taking strips off the top and you work your way down. So you start really small at the top, creating a kind of what they call like a black line. So kind of 1 foot strips, increasing like the distance of the burnt area. And eventually you can start kind of taking more and more chunks off that are larger. So by the end, you're say doing 20-foot strips. And essentially what you're trying to do is keep the intensity down so it doesn't burn all the organics, but you don't want it to burn too hot. Once it burns too hot, you kind of lose a lot of the nutrients in the soil.
Right, interesting. Thank you. So obviously some fires were really close to where people were living and a lot of homes were lost this year. So how can people, for fires that are caused by humans, what can people do to prevent these fires?
Yeah, I think that like a big one would just be like to have an awareness. I think a lot of times, individuals will be like, oh yeah, like we can have a campfire. It doesn't seem too hot or dry, but really, they haven't fully put out the fire. A wind picks up, and you have these fires starting from a completely avoidable circumstance. So I think realistically, the biggest thing that people could do is get educated on how to fire smart their property, how to be fire smart in general. And if that's, not doing anything that's going to cause sparking, if they're shutting down their farming activities during certain times of the year, essentially just being fire smart. And, there's definitely pages on the internet. The government of British Columbia does have a very, helpful page on, fire smart activities that people should be kind of looking over to prevent, the next big wildfire in their community.
Right, and I will add those websites in our show notes. So another question I have for you in regards to community members keeping safe, how can people be prepared for fires?
Well, if you talk to my dad, it's a Tupperware, a Rubbermaid full of kind of like essential stuff that he does not want to be burned, and a self-sustaining kit that would last him and his family 24 to 48 hours. But yeah, I honestly truly do believe that it is not the worst idea in the world to have a Rubbermaid full of kind of important stuff if the fire indices are that bad. But for the most part, I do think that misinformation is super damaging to communities. There's a lot of wildfires that we let grow and that we do not action in our zone, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. Really, a lot of these fires, the only thing that's back there that is worth any sort of value is the timber value, but it's a super dense forest that naturally burns, and we should. And I have seen a lot of very negative things towards kind of the BC Wildfire Service on Facebook and Instagram and the social media websites. And a lot of the information that is being spread there is misleading, and it's misguiding to locals who are trying to get accurate information to the current situation of their town and their province.
That's great. Thank you. So one thing that we do on our radio show with Sound Constitution here is we really try to focus on sharing information that is reliable and kind of debunking myths and ensuring that people can access reliable information. So that's great. So where can people find accurate information on wildfires?
I honestly think that the best way to find accurate information is through the BC government. They try their best, and I think they do a very excellent job at ensuring like up-to-date information on wildfire activity. It's a very important aspect of the job, and they do it very well. Communication obviously is probably one of the most important parts of wildfire fighting. Having that, transparency with the public, having them know exactly what's going on at all times, prevents panic when panic is not needed. It allows them to, send out evacuation orders when evacuation orders are needed. So the government of British Columbia would be the best place to find up-to-date, reliable information regarding wildfires in the area.
Great, thank you. And again, that will be in our show notes. In case you're just tuning in, you're listening to CHLY 101.7 FM, and I'm interviewing Tristan Nissen, a wildland firefighter. Obviously, you work a dangerous job. Can you tell me about some of the risks that are associated with your role?
Yeah, so driving would be the biggest risk, and that's something that surprises a lot of people when they hear that. We drive very steep and narrow forest service roads, with trucks that are very large and full of water, and we're often dealing with two-way traffic. A lot of these roads that we are accessing fires from have active logging operations on them. So, you're driving up a forest service road, and at the same time you have a massive 16-wheel logging truck full of logs headed on the way down. So that is by far the most dangerous part of our job, and it's something that had claimed the lives of 4 contract firefighters, I think, just last week. Myself, I've seen some very scary forest service roads that are definitely a hazard, and you have to take those roads extremely slow and be a very skilled and competent driver when you're behind the wheel, for sure.
And not only that, but you're also working long hours and obviously quite exhausted when you're driving some of these roads.
Yeah, we take it like very seriously in the sense that there's like, when you're in the vehicle, you're still on the job, you're still a professional. So everyone's, very awake and alert, and you check in with your driver very, very constantly, making sure that they're, fully aware of what's going on. They're not drifting off, because yeah, absolutely, total hazard. Caffeine is your friend. We consume a lot of caffeine throughout a day, and especially if there's a long drive ahead of us, there's at the end of the day, there's definitely some caffeine being consumed for sure.
What about smoke inhalation?
Yeah, and so that's like obviously one of the hazards is the driving, but then there's the actual, hazards on the fire line, which danger trees.
Can you explain a little bit about what a danger tree is?
Yeah, danger tree can be a lot of things, but in the context of a wildfire scenario, it's normally a tree that has had burnt out roots or a burnt out stem has reduced structural integrity. And you see that a lot, especially our zone, where it's like a steep hill, and it's a spruce tree with a shallow root system, and the roots have been burning, and we see a lot of of trees. And so that's why we take, danger tree assessing and danger tree falling very seriously. It's a very important part of a job. And essentially you go around and you sanitize the area to make sure that the workers are safe.
How about the smoke inhalation? How do you manage that?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good question. It's definitely a concern. I haven't actually done a ton of research on it, and it's not really available to us. Masks are not mandatory on the fire line, and I imagine that in the next 10 years we will see that masks will be part of our PPE, or personal protective equipment. Yes, it's you definitely kind of figure out where to stand, especially when you're hosing. You're hitting a hot spot and there's like dry ash and dust and smoke being blown up. And I think it takes a few years to figure out how not to be inhaling that all the time, and you can find little pockets of clean air. But yeah, it's definitely a concern to me, especially with I like having good lungs, and at the end of some shifts where you're breathing in smoke a lot, it's definitely concerning. And I would like to see a bit more research done and have that research a bit more available to the workers for BC Wildfire.
Yes, I imagine that will be a hot topic in the following years, how the long-term effects of working on these fire lines. You mentioned a few, but are there anything else you'd like to mention about how you minimize risks?
I think it's the biggest way to minimize risk is to be prepared. We do a training week at the beginning of every year where we kind of just hone in our skills and knowledge and exactly kind of how we're going to set the tone for the rest of the year. So in the spring, we go out, it's a week long, and it's regular, like very physically demanding. They kind of like put you through hell a little bit. It's a lot of running, it's a lot of carrying weight, and it's supposed to really kind of mimic the intensity of the fire line. And the whole point of that is that when things get bad during the summer, you can look back and be like, the hardest week of the year was that training week. And so that's what we're trying to kind of mimic, is that when things get tough, you can look back and be like, I've already done this, I can do it again. And so on top of that, we do so much like physical training, very rigorously working out, because we do notice that if you're not physically fit or in shape, that's when you start to make mistakes, is when you're tired and you're feeling worn down and you start to cut corners to make it a little bit easier on yourself, is where we see that mistakes and injuries start to happen. So we take a lot of pride in trying to maintain physical fitness, as well as making sure that everyone is extremely competent in their role. So having a strong chainsaw program really helps a base and being able to minimize risks around the fire line. There's like definitely a shortage of fallers across BC Wildfire. And that definitely poses a challenge to the effectiveness of firefighting.
Could you explain a little bit what a faller is?
Yeah, a faller is someone who has gone through a program that allows them to, within their capabilities, fall trees. So they're able to use a chainsaw to cut down trees that pose a risk on wildfire fighters.
Right, thank you. So obviously, wildfire fighting is different than firefighting in a city. So what are some of the particular challenges associated with fighting wildfires?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of parallels, but they're also completely different jobs. The particular challenges of wildfire fighting is that access. I think access would probably be the biggest one. We're not fighting fire on a city street where if someone gets hurt, they're within it, in an ambulance in 2 minutes. You are sometimes, hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest town, and you are only accessible by helicopter, and it's steep, and there's wildlife, and there's weather, and you're dealing with bugs. It's much more remote than what a city firefighter would have to deal with. And the biggest one is that the things that are on fire are hazardous. I mean, that's also, similar to a house, but every tree that has been burnt out by fire is a potential hazard that we have to deal with. And the other one would be water. City fires have a fire hydrant at the end of each street. where a lot of times on a ridge top, we actually do not have water. So figuring out how to set up a water system to put out the fire can be the hardest and most rigorous part of the job. And that is done if there's like actually no water available. We put out this big bucket that's about 2,500 gallons, and essentially a helicopter will come and they will find a lake nearby and they will fill up that bucket of water so that we can hose out of it. If other than that, we try and look for like that's kind of like last resort because it's super expensive. Like heli water, anytime a helicopter is using time to fill up a bladder is outrageously expensive. Other than that, our main kind of goal is to find a water source. So that's a creek, a lake, and then we have a pump going out of that, and the pump pushes water, and we string out hose. The hoses are 30 meters long, so sometimes they're stringing out 40 hose, and we use that to put water onto the fire.
What are some of the dangers to the general population with the increased wildfires this year?
Like I think that if you look, we did lose a lot of homes. I'm not too sure how many people were hurt in the wildfire, but yeah, like it's a super scary time. And we were super lucky kind of in our zone that we didn't see any fires that close to communities where I don't know if we lost any homes. But yeah, it's definitely a scary time. It's dry, it's windy, it's warm. It was kind of like a drought. Yeah, I think people kind of had the right to be nervous and scared because there was some real dangers out there. Absolutely. And
And
I
I guess
think,
fear is one of the big dangers as well. It is scary.
yeah, absolutely. People aren't supposed to be living in constant stress of their livelihoods being burnt down. And I feel for the people that are, because in some communities that aren't necessarily that well set up for a wildfire, it's super scary. If you just look at Kelowna got hit pretty hard this year, and that was absolutely heartbreaking. A lot of people lost their livelihoods in that fire.
So, as many of us know, there have unfortunately been several tragedies in the wildfire community this year. If you're comfortable speaking on this, how did this impact the wildfire community?
Um, it was a pretty crushing summer. Like there was far too many tragedies this year. I mean, one's too many, but uh yeah, it was an absolute gut-wrenching summer. And I think that when this season finally ends, there'll be a lot of reflection on how the summer went and how people feel about those events. And I'm not too sure what will come of it. Uh, it's just, it's a reminder that this job is dangerous, and that you kind of always have to expect the unexpected. I can't really comment on anything more than that because I don't know what else really to say. But I think that at the end of the day, I just feel pretty heartbroken by a lot of those events, and I just hope it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Obviously, you're exhausted, and at this point, I'm sure there can be some tough days. So, what are some things that you do to take care of yourself?
I think the biggest one is that we just ensure that everyone is physically and emotionally there. We have a very open kind of team environment where no one's necessarily scared to say anything if they're feeling distracted. We check in with each other all the time. It's partly like you can sense when someone's off. You spend a lot of hours with your crew, and if you see someone like show up late for breakfast, you're like, okay, that's weird. That person hasn't been late ever, and like sure enough, they're super sick or under the weather or feeling distracted. So yeah, I think because you spend so much time with your crew, you really kind of develop a strong sense of people's emotional kind of well-being, and I think we encourage that. We encourage like a very open group and team dynamic that encourages people to come forward if they're not feeling safe in a situation. And yeah, and then I think the biggest one again is just trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Like you're on the road a lot, it's long hours, you're not necessarily eating the best food a lot of the times, but trying to, encourage people to keep the nutrition up, ensure they're drinking water, working out and staying healthy as possible. And also, enjoying the time off, taking it off, relaxing, hanging out, and recharging for the next fire.
What is one of your most memorable moments on a deployment?
This year I was fortunate enough to go to an area that I haven't been before. It was up in Atlan, BC, and it was just like somewhere that, I couldn't see myself, having time to go visit anytime soon. So to go kind of see a totally different area of the province, and fight some very interesting fires in a really cool spot with a great crew was super memorable. I just felt like I was so fortunate to kind of be in this area that I am and have this job where it allows me to travel to remote parts of the province and see places that I may never see again. Um, so yeah, my Atlan deployment was a super special one for sure.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Tristan. That's all the questions I have for you today. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners before we go?
No, I think I'll probably just, leave it at that and just encourage people to ensure that they're prepared for the next wildfire season. And I'd also encourage any listeners who are interested in joining the BC Wildfire to put in an application. It's a very rewarding job. It's great people, and it's definitely an adventure that I'd recommend to most young individuals in the province.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Tristan. And I hope that you have a restful winter when the season's over.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Pleasure talking to you.
Once again, that was Tristan Nissen, an initial attack crew member for BC Wildfire Services, speaking about his experiences working on the front lines. In case you're just tuning in now, you're listening to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM, and today we're speaking about wildfires and the effects it has on firefighters and community members.
The best way to protect your health from wildfire smoke is to reduce your exposure to the smoke and seek cleaner air. The Ontario Health Authority Medical Health Officer, Dr. Sue Pollock, shares a few ways to protect yourself and others from wildfire smoke. 1. Stay indoors. Reduce time spent outdoors to protect your health. 2. Reduce outdoor physical activity. Refer to the Air Quality Health Index and decrease physical exertion outdoors when air quality is poor. 3. Consider wearing a well-fitted respirator if you cannot access cleaner air. Use a well-fitted respirator, for example an N95 mask, properly to reduce exposure to particulate matter in smoke. 4. Activate medical management action plans. Ensure that your plan to self-manage any chronic diseases are in place and up to date, and that adequate rescue medications are available to you. 5. Use a home clean air shelter. Spend time in a room in your home with a portable air cleaner with HEPA filtration to reduce smoke exposure. A few tips to remember for the next wildfire season. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
I had the opportunity to interview Trina Moyels. Trina is an award-winning Canadian author and journalist whose work is inspired by rural communities and their relationships with land, wildfire, food security, and climate change. Trina is also the author of a recent article called Treated Like Machines: Wildfire Fighters Describe a Mental Health Crisis on the Front Lines. All right, so I'm joined here with Trina Moyels, who is an award-winning Canadian author and journalist. So thank you so much for joining us on our show today.
Thanks for having me on.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm originally from northwestern Alberta in Treaty 8 in a town called Peace River. And I grew up here in the north. I today work as a professional writer and author. And then I also worked for 7 years with Alberta Wildfire as a lookout observer, so responsible for spotting smoke, which is the first sign of wildfires in the boreal forest. And then I wrote a book called Lookout: Love, Solitude, and Searching for Wildfire in the Boreal Forest, which came out a couple of years ago, about my experiences working out in the bush as a wildfire lookout. And it's sort of a commentary on climate change and wildfire ecology. And then over the past year, I've been working as a a journalist, and taking a lot of interest in writing about wildfire on the front lines, and climate change and whatnot.
Great. I actually just got a copy of your book, Lookout, so I'm looking forward to reading that. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what inspired you to pursue journalism and writing?
Yeah, I think I've always been a natural storyteller. Writing always and reading always appealed to me when I was young. And I think if you have a great love for reading, then you also have an interest in writing. And I didn't start off as a journalist. I worked actually in the field of rural community development for almost a decade, but took great interest in sort of human rights stories, and so I just began freelance writing on the side, writing a story here or there for like a journal or an online newspaper, and just really enjoyed interviewing people and hearing their stories, and thinking about things critically, and yeah, it's sort of evolved over the years, and I think after about 10 years of doing sort of freelance on the side, I'm now working full time as a journalist and storyteller.
So I came across your article, Treated Like Machines, Wildfire Fighters Describe a Mental Health Crisis on the Front Lines. Are you able to tell our listeners a little bit about this publication?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a story that evolved. Well, I would really say it's kind of evolved over the 7 years that I worked as a wildfire lookout and a seasonal worker for Alberta Wildfire. And anyone who's worked in wildfire knows that it's kind of its own subculture, something you really becomes a lifestyle, and becomes a community and a culture in a way. Um, and I've had really positive experiences working for Wildfire. I've met so many incredible people, from radio dispatchers to fellow lookouts to other wildland firefighters. So it really was a period of my life that it really shaped me as a person, and developed some incredibly important relationships out of that experience. And this was the first year in 7 years that I wasn't working as a seasonal employee for the government. And so I had a little bit more freedom in terms of my writing, and what issues I wanted to focus on. And something I often felt when I did work within Alberta Wildfire was there was a real lack of understanding from the public as to what it means to be a seasonal worker and working on the front lines of wildfire response. And so I teamed up with a photojournalist based out of Vancouver, Jesse Winter, and he said, do you want to work on something together? And I said, yeah, I think a really important story that's not told in the media is looking at the experience of mental health struggles and some of the struggles that seasonal workers face in not necessarily, exclusive to Alberta or even BC. That's sort of where our networks were. But I think really is an experience that's like North America wide. Many of these challenges are faced by wildland firefighters, often seasonal with limited contracts, and right across Canada and in the United States as well. So and this year, of course, with the scale and number of wildfires that we've seen in across Canada, it seemed like a really important time to be focusing on these issues. So we worked on this story very slowly over 3 months, interviewing firefighters on and off the record about their experiences working with both BC Wildfire Agency and Alberta Wildfire. And a lot of the themes that came up were related to, what came out in the article. So looking at the difficulty of the job, the short-term nature of the job, the lack of protections and often sort of health benefits, low pay, and then the struggle of entering the off season with virtually no support from agencies because your contract's been terminated. So looking at the challenges of mental health related to this emergency response profession, like so many first responder professions. So that's sort of what inspired Jesse and I to write the article for the Narwhal.
Right, great. And I guess you must have had some interesting perspectives being having worked with wildfire before. So you kind of touched on this, but what was your experience interviewing the men and women on the front lines?
I was very emotional, to be honest. Of course, like I could relate to many of the stories, but I think it still surprised me, the sort of the drive that people had to want to share their story with me, and the extent to which they opened up. That vulnerability, I think, caught me off guard. And I was saying to Jesse afterwards, like, I think I cried in every interview because I felt so sort of moved by the experiences that had been shared with me. Um, a lot of people spoke about just sort of the lack of understanding from government agencies and probably the public too. And that's no one's fault from the public. I think it's just lack of awareness. And, there aren't a lot of human interest stories told about those who work in wildfire. And I think that's because the government has to keep so many things, like there is sort of this hush hush mentality of like you can't talk to the media about what it's really like.
Yeah.
And I understand that to some extent, having worked for the government and been on that side of things. On the other hand, it has resulted in sort of a public that's been a bit disengaged from what's actually going on the front lines. So there's a real like desire for people to want to tell their stories to us. And yeah, just really difficult things that people are grappling with. And something that really came up quite often was just this feeling of being sort of steamrolled through this grind. This one person I interviewed described it as the cycle of working wildfire is a bit like a meat grinder. So come early May, the fires exploded in both Alberta and BC this year, and they were just sort of chucked right into it. In Alberta, that's not unusual to have big fires in early May. And that's typically actually when Alberta does get their big wildfires, whereas things wouldn't usually sort of start heating up in BC until June. So it sort of shifted their fire season significantly earlier. But I don't think the same excuse can apply in Alberta because, they really should have seen these big fires coming in Alberta anyways. But yeah, it's they're working incredibly long hours. The jobs are very physical. Sometimes they're putting in 12-hour days. In Alberta, crews can be pushed to work 24 days,
Wow.
which is insane. Thinking, working 14 to 16-hour days of hard physical labor where you're out in the bush. You're not just doing hard work, but you have to have such environmental awareness around you. Watching for trees that have burnt out or not getting lost on a fire. So the job is really, it's mentally draining, it's physically draining, and it's psychologically draining. Sometimes they're camped out on fires, so sleeping in fields. It may be raining on a fire, so sleeping in the cold, rainy conditions. All these things start to wear, and very little sort of alone time for debriefing as well too. I know those things, people told me that really start to drain on them. And this year there was a resource shortage in both provinces. So of course, a lot of that burden fell on crews who were being literally overworked. And as one person said in the interview or in the article, we are essentially treated like machines. And since the article came out, actually, a few folks have reached out to me, firefighters, and said, that's exactly the sentiment that we're feeling on these big fires right now, is that they have been treated like resources and not human beings.
Wow. So obviously this fire season has been incredibly challenging in both British Columbia and Alberta. What are some of the reasons that this has been a particularly challenging season?
Well, I think that's a pretty involves a pretty complex answer. I mean, something that folks on the front lines often talk about is the media's obsession with the word unprecedented. It really seems for the last 10 years, every fire season that is a fire season that impacts communities on, to a greater extent than the word unprecedented comes into the media. But I mean, those who work in wildfire know that these trends, I mean, the signs of fire seasons like the one we've seen this year have been around for actually quite a while. I mean, if you look in Alberta, Slave Lake, 2/3 of the community burnt down in 2011. That was over a decade ago. So the warning signs have been there for a very long time, actually. But of course, this year, with being an El Nino year, with there's a number of things at play with more extreme sort of bouts of very, very hot, dry weather. The incidence of high winds, that's something that's really driving these fires, is many of them are high wind events, maybe caused by lightning, which is natural in the boreal forest, but the speed at which these fires are taking off is often driven by wind events. So extreme weather plays into this, of course, and climate change. Also, too, like people building into forests. I mean, we have more people on the landscape than ever before. People want to build their homes and feel like they're in the forest, but it's important to have a buffer around your homes. So these are, and communities are largely underprepared when it comes to fire smarting. The other thing is the public doesn't like smoke. So the idea of prescribed burns or cultural burns have become very political. And, government agencies are hesitant to do them, but we arguably need more wildfire on the landscape, which means some public acceptance of having some level of smoke, and that's done with the intention to prevent these larger scale wildfires. So I think it's a pretty complex thing that we're looking at right now, and there's not really like one cause. Another thing that we heard from frontline workers was that both agencies were under-resourced and underprepared. And the question is, of course, is if we know that wildfires are getting worse, like why aren't we investing more money into response, and hiring more people on? And, maybe that means like doing larger recruitment. Maybe that means having better pay and benefits, things that will actually attract people and hold people in these professions. And I think the key word there is profession. Often workers feel like they're sort of being treated like sort of these sort of grunt positions versus, that they're developing an expertise, a real niche in their profession. And then for, of course, the compensation to be there to recognize that as well. So I think that's also something important to point out about the response to the scale of this year's fires is like, were the agencies ready? And a lot of people on the front lines say no, they didn't feel ready.
Right. And we're definitely seeing that in what the firefighters have been saying. So, as mentioned in your article, this fire season has not been without tragedy. Unfortunately, 6 firefighters have lost their lives in BC alone this year, and we have all felt these losses. So how have the losses of fellow wildfire fighters impacted this tight-knit community?
Yeah, I think this has been a very devastating year for firefighters. The first deaths that occurred on the fire line all happened within essentially 2 weeks, and that was in mid-July to late July. And I do believe the death count is actually up to 8 now, as there was recently, actually the day that the Narwhal article came out, there was 4 contract wildfires that died in a car crash coming back off of a fire late at night. And that was something, that came up as well, as it's not just working on the wildfires, but it's actually traveling, as crews are traveling between fires, and working a 16-hour day, and then having maybe 4 hours of sleep, and then having to operate a vehicle to drive to the next fire. So these are some of the things that are coming up. But the folks I've spoken to, this has hit really, really hard, and people are really feeling it. It's as it is, crews have a very tight-knit sort of culture, and I think that's sort of a strategy for how they get through these difficult seasons. Is there's a real sense of camaraderie and almost family like experience that develops when you're on the fire line and you work in these wildfire agencies. I think just having that strong common purpose, and and being in really sometimes some really harrowing situations together as a crew. It bonds you. So the deaths that occurred, I think, have really hit people quite hard. And as one person we spoke to said, like, this is going to be an incredibly difficult season for people to make sense of. And I think because, I mean, the wildfire season is still going on right now. Like, many have left, their contracts have been terminated to, whether they're going back to school or pursuing other work, but there's still, fires burning out there and still crews out there. I think when this is really the scale of this season is really gonna hit firefighters, it will happen in the off season. And that's actually when, they're the most vulnerable, because many of them are not contracted by these, like their contracts have been terminated, and then they're totally lacking access to mental health services. So yeah, I think that's going to be a very difficult year for firefighters to make sense of.
Your article speaks to the alarming rates of PTSD within the wildfire community. What is being done, if anything, to support our firefighters during or after the season ends?
There are some services that both the agencies have, and in BC has a program that a lot of firefighters spoke about called Resilient Minds, and that's a course that they take before their season even starts. And a lot of it is focused on mental health, looking for signs when people are struggling from, experiencing different incidents or, other sort of traumatic things that happen on the fire line. So there are supports in place. Both agencies have sort of a hotline available, mental health, mental health crisis hotline available that they can call 24/7 through this season. But I want to point out there too is it's like a crisis hotline is not the same thing as having access to working with the same sort of trauma counselor time after time. That's a very different service. When they call the hotline, they're always talking to a different person. And that, I think that's significant to point out, that yes, there's crisis support available, but not necessarily ongoing trauma counseling available. And that seasonal employees have different access to different services often than the full-time employees. That's another significant thing, I think, to point out. And then when and if there's a serious incident that happens, so say like this year, for example, there have been crews that have lost people on the fire line, or in Alberta there was a helicopter crash as a pilot who was working on one of the fires this year, and both agencies have, it's called like the acronym is a CISM, and it's essentially like a crisis incident support program that people go through following these really sort of more like a death, or for example, and then they would go through this like trauma counseling to debrief these events. But it's very event specific, and what a lot of the firefighters we've spoken to is it's not necessarily always like this devastating thing that happens on the fire line. It's more sort of like the accumulation of micro moments,
Right.
very many like sort of close calls, or like seeing a tree come down, it doesn't hit you, but it comes down close to you. Well, then, like, is that trauma? Like, I think many trauma counselors would say, yes, that's an example of, a small T versus a large T trauma event, which would be, say, like a death or a helicopter crash. So it's the accumulation of these smaller traumatic moments, I think, that build up in a lot of firefighters. And there isn't always the same sort of access to support to debrief those moments, if that makes sense.
Yes, that is a great answer. Thank you. So that's actually all the questions I have for you today, Trina. Are there any other messages that you'd like to share with our listeners about wildfire or anything else?
No, I mean, I think thanks for having me on the show. It's wonderful to be able to share some of these issues with the wider public, and I think that's part of it. Is there's definitely a gap between what the public understands and the experience on the front lines of the wildfire crisis. So no, thank you very much, and thanks for including me on the show.
Right. And of course, the article will be posted in our show notes for our listeners to have a read if they are interested. So thank you once again, Trina, and have a good day.
Thank you so much.
In case you're just tuning in now, you just heard from Trina Moyels, award-winning Canadian author and journalist, speaking about her most recent article, Treated Like Machines, Wildfire Fighters Describe a Mental Health Crisis on the Front Lines. You're listening to CHLY 101.7 FM.
Well, that sound means you've reached the end of another episode of A Sound Constitution. Thank you everyone for tuning in today with your hosts, Lauren, McKenna, Karis, and Kiana. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Join the conversation, access our show notes, and be in the know for our next episodes. As always, our friendly reminder to our listeners that the information presented in this show is for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice of your primary healthcare professional. If you have any questions or concerns about what's being discussed, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook at A Sound Constitution, Instagram at CHLY A Sound Constitution, all one word, or email us at asoundconstitution@gmail.com. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Until then,